You know, if a food stylist hands you a sandwich, you always have to be suspicious. What is hiding in that sandwich? I'm Joni Simon, food photographer and educator. Welcome to my studio. This is the Bite Shot, where I love to share the things that I've learned on my food photography journey in hopes that it helps you on yours. And today we are going through a top, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, top 14 tools that we use for food styling here in my studio, both myself as well as the stylists who I have the pleasure of working with. And we're gonna work backward. We're gonna go from like the least frequently used. I would say everything on this list definitely gets used on a regular basis, but we're gonna go from like the least frequently used, not used every single shoot, but still makes an appearance from time to time, up to the things that we use literally every single day, every single time we're shooting. We need these things. So item number 14, any ideas what this is? It's a grill starter, but what we use this for is adding char to meats or vegetables, anything that we need like those grill marks on. You just fire this puppy up. These get super hot, be super careful with these, but you just like lay them down where you want the grill marks without having to have a grill. Obviously, if you have a grill and you want to go for that, great, but this is a great cheat. So then number 13, I color coordinated with it today, not on purpose. This is a heat gun, and this actually gets used more frequently than you'd think. It definitely has a lot of different applications. Now, one word of warning with this, I know it looks like a blow dryer. It is not. Do not point this at your head or at anyone else. It gets extremely hot, screaming hot. So big warnings on this one. Even too, after you've used it, when you set it down, just be careful about where this end is, because if it's not on a heat resistant surface, it's bound to melt or burn something. So again, just be very careful with this one. But most often we're using this anytime we need concentrated heat in a specific spot. So things, for example, like toasting bread, if you want just that nice little toasty factor around the edges without putting it in the oven or a toaster, can be great too for crisping things up. If you want some like crispy edges on a pepperoni, I've done that before. Also super helpful if you're working with cheese and you need to kind of like re-engage, like I think about the pizza video I did many moons ago, and you want to re-engage the cheese so you can get a nice cheese pull. The heat gun is going to be your friend there. We actually just used it too for a cheesecake shoot. We were shooting for Baker by Nature. She had this orange mascarpone chocolate cheesecake. I mean, OMG. And when she hopped online to kind of look at the images as they were coming through and capture one, she looked at it and said, ooh, you know what would just make this extra and take it over the top is if the ganache that's on top had a little bit of extra shine to it. You know, can you hit it with some heat to get that shine to come back, to melt down the chocolate a little bit? So sure enough, Brendan busted out the heat gun, re-engaged that chocolate, and you can just see like that before and after of just that little bit of heat. Ooh, specular highlights, say what? I haven't thrown that term out here on the channel in a while. If you're not familiar with specular highlights, it's the shinies. Anytime you get the little shiny, sparkly little moments because the way that the light is reflecting off a shiny surface on food, that just, so mouthwatering. Number 12, the X-Acto knife. Again, dangerous. There's so many dangerous things I'm realizing in food styling. Be careful. Now again, this one doesn't get used on every shoot, but for sure when there's pie or cheesecake involved and I need a really clean slice, this super sharp edge really helps, especially just like at the very tip of the triangle. So if you need really precise cuts, and I mean, obviously you have kitchen knives and things like that, but for that precision factor, an X-Acto knife, super helpful. So then number 11, we've got our T-pins. Now, admittedly, again, we don't use these on every shoot. I would say these come out only when we're working with sandwiches or things where we need things to stay together. And I would say too, in terms of frequency of use of some of these items, it will depend on the kind of work that you're doing, the kinds of clients that you're serving, and the food that's being prepared. Like I would not go into a sandwich without some quality T-pins, but we haven't done sandwiches in a while here, so we haven't used these frequently, but still super helpful to have because they just help hold things in place, especially if you're stacking them or, you know, you've got like that Dagwood sandwich that's just like layers and layers and you're like, I just need this to stay right here. Pop a T-pin in it, that little top, that's why they call it a T-pin, right? That little top, which is why this is different than, say, a toothpick, which we'll get to the toothpicks, don't worry, they're coming. But the T-pin has the little T, right? Like looks like a T, so cute. But this helps to keep things like lettuce from sliding around and kind of helps to hold it, as opposed to just like kind of adding an anchor. This really helps to kind of keep things in place and prevent it from sliding around. So then number 10, and we're getting into the more well-loved department. You can see this thing's all busted up because we just get in there and we're in the chaos of a shoot, and you just need a spoon to stay where it's supposed to stay, or the fork is sliding around, or things are just, you need a little sticky something to hold it in place. That's when we bust out our sticky putty. This particular one, I've tried lots of different putties, and people try to tell me there's other stylists out there who have like 10 different kinds of putties, which is great. Like, when you get into like the super intense food styling and you're working on advertising sets and you're hardcore about it, awesome. Different kinds of putties serve different kinds of purposes. But to me, this is a great universal all around and great for the work that I do, which is mostly, again, just getting a utensil to stay where we put it. And so the intended purpose of this stuff is for picture frames or for hanging artwork on a wall, just to keep it from shifting and moving around. You just stick this on, the corner of the frame and it stays put. But we just use it here in the studio to keep utensils in place. But it is hilarious because sometimes I forget that this has been put on a plate, and I'll be doing dishes or, going back through plates that we have here in the studio, and I'm like, oh, how long's that little guy been there? They kind of stick there and stay, and that's just fine. But it does come off nice and clean, so it's not going to wreck the surface, wreck the pottery. If you've got some really nice things you're working with, this is intended to easily unaffix from whatever surface or whatever item you've put it on. One other way that I use this often is for overhead shots when I don't want things rolling around or moving around. This is super key if you're shooting bottles and you're laying them down, or cans or jars or something that's round and apt to move. Just stick a little bit of this underneath it, kind of just off to the side, and it'll help it stay in place. Super helpful. Now, if you're interested in any of the specific products that I'm mentioning, because there are different, manufacturers, different ones out there, so I will link the specific ones that I have, of course, down the description box below. Number 9, and these walk off from my studio all the time, not because of the people who are working here, but because of the other little people who live here, my kids. They're always taking off with them. So I feel like I should buy scissors by the gross, because you gotta have scissors, right? Cutting parchment paper or cutting herbs, or I just feel like there are things that need to be cut at some point in time. Having some nice quality, controlled, sharp scissors, always helpful on set. So number 8, the Crumb Cleaner Upper, a makeup brush, a nice fan brush, super helpful on set. Now, I don't use this for my makeup. This is dedicated to studio use, but I love using a fan brush for just cleaning up little spots, like, if you are notorious or you're shooting something where we're getting a lot of crumbs intentionally around the scene, but sometimes you're like, ooh, I took it a little far, I need to brush some of those away. Having a nice controlled fan brush can just help to clean up those little spots. Because sometimes like throwing a paper towel in there or a towel, that can, kind of disrupt all the other magic that you've created. So getting in there with a nice fan brush helps for cleanup. So number 7, and I would say this one gets used probably every other shoot here in the studio, again, kind of dependent on the sort of work that you're doing, but something that may be surprising to you that we use often around here are rulers. Now, this is a 6-inch ruler. My favorite is the 12-inch. It kind of comes from a set and looks very similar to this one, but it seems to have walked off. I couldn't find it this morning. Like, where's the ruler, right? So maybe we need to do a little reorg around here to find everything that's gone missing. But rulers are really helpful, for example, in recipes where a specific thickness is dictated. Like if you're doing a French toast and we want 1-inch slices, you can eyeball it, but it is really good to be able to specifically measure it. This also comes in handy in a lot of baking recipes where a very specific size is dictated. Like, maybe we need a particular size pie plate, or we need to roll the pie crust to a certain diameter. We were doing scones recently here in the studio, and the recipe said said that before you start the cutting process of the scones, you want to make sure to get, I think it was like an 8 or a 10-inch round, so that you're going to get really nice consistent results in terms of your scones. So being able to measure those things, also measuring parchment paper if you need to cut parchment paper down to size. So that precision really helps to ensure consistency in what you're creating and that you're able to nail what was in the recipe or dictated by whomever you're shooting for. So now everything else from here on out, these are things that are must-haves on set that we use every single time. And again, some of this may be dependent on just kind of the work that we're doing and how we've adapted our workflows. But one thing, number 6, is an offset spatula. Specifically this size, like the mini, I don't know if this is a mini, this is a small. There's the bigger ones, right? But we like a little small offset spatula for all sorts of things. Of course, like swirling ganache and putting, you know, finishing touches on a cake, things like that. But this is also perfect in the sense of being able to move things around very precisely. Like if you have cut out a slice of cheesecake and you just want to slightly move it out, instead of having like a big old spatula, having this nice little guy, super helpful. I feel like the mini offset gets used here in our studio and the kind of work that we do more often for moving things around than it is for even applying frosting. But obviously, if you're a baker or you're shooting exclusively baked goods and that is your area of focus, this is an indispensable tool for frosting and cakes and all those things as well. Number 5, and I told you we'd get here, give you a little preview that you gotta always have some toothpicks. These are always stationed like right up over here. Right there is where they live here in the studio, right next to the oven, because as we're cooking things, we want to test it for doneness. And y'all, you know the toothpick trick, right? If it comes out clean, that means your cake is ready to go. It's fully baked. But of course, these also serve double duty in helping with things like sandwiches, or if we need to keep something in a spot and kind of have some internal stability inside of that thing. But again, I think about sandwiches kind of like in coordination with the T-pins, but these can serve a multitude of different purposes in addition to making sure your cakes are properly cooked. So number 4, this is several different tools, but they all kind of fall into the same category for me of things that add shine to our foods. Again, we talked about the specular highlights and we want that sparkle factor. We want certain foods to look juicy. We want certain things to look, you know, kind of have a little bit of a wet look or, you know, a little bit of moisture. And so there's a myriad of tools. Like any professional stylist will have many different ways to add shine to a scene and to a food, depending on what that food is. So one that gets used around here a lot is just a pastry brush with a dish of oil. And usually we're using maybe like a vegetable oil. I often cook with avocado oil, so a lot of times we're using that. You don't necessarily want something with a ton of viscosity. Like I'm thinking some of those premium olive oils, not that you would use a premium olive oil for styling. Like I feel like that would be wasted on a food styling set. But you want to make sure that something that's got kind of a nice subtle color that's not going to add a lot of color to the food. You just want to add that little shine. And so I find this most helpful for things like burgers or meats, maybe grilled vegetables, things that we want kind of a higher shine and sheen to, because this is going to be thicker as opposed to things like a spray bottle. And I discovered this spray bottle about a year ago. I love this one. It's because, and any food stylist will tell you, they nerd out on the mist. Right? You see that mist, like it's just like such a quality mist, because every little atomizer, I think that's what we call those, will have a different like size of droplet that it creates, which you're like, wow, we're going into super nerd territory. But this particular one, it's got a glass bottle, but I just love, like, it's big enough that we get some nice, like if you put it on a salad or you put it on some greens or microgreens or fruits, like it's gonna build up nicely, but at the same time, like it disperses evenly. Because definitely there are some of these out there that like do just sort of a direct hit and you're like, ah, that just like messed everything up, right? So this is nice little subtle mist. Love that one. Same reason too that we love the Evian facial spray. This is just water, super fancy, expensive face water. But I think that I go through maybe one of these a year. It is pretty spendy, but again, you know, for how often I'm using it and how much of it I'm using on the food, it lasts about a year. And again, it has just such a nice subtle spray in terms of the size of those droplets and the evenness of the direction that it sprays in. But you talk to any food stylist and they will have opinions about the best way to spray down a food in terms of like the applicator. Now, one thing you'll see too that I talked about in the previous version of this video is that some stylists will add glycerin to the water into a spray bottle like this, because the glycerin helps the water to kind of bead up. So you think about things like juicy tomatoes, you're doing like a macro shot and you want to see those beads of water. Adding a little bit of glycerin to the water will help it do that. But honestly, around here in the studio, we don't find as much need for that. That's not the kind of work that we're doing. We're doing much more editorial style and kind of really letting the food be the food. We're not doctoring it up a ton, just a little spray of water. So pretty much at this point here in our studio, all of the spray bottles are just filled with water. So then number 3, we got our tweezers, and these are some culinary tweezers. These are nice because they are very precise. They have a nice bit of length. They're easy to hold. This is my favorite size. I think other people will have different opinions about the optimal size of tweezers. I like these ones because they don't feel gigantic and huge, but we can get in there and get things. Now, Brendan and his food styling kit, he has a number of different tweezers, so just a matter of the kind of work that you're doing and if you're a stylist versus being a photographer. These are my faves. So item number 2, I feel like we should start like a drum roll, please. Number 2 on the list are makeup wedges. And these particular makeup wedges are a favorite because of their thickness and their sponginess. I know, we're getting like granular and detailed. But nearly every single shoot in here, we've got one of these little guys hanging out underneath a food, underneath a dish, somewhere where we need to get some lift, where we need something to sit just a specific way, that these are great for just propping things up. And this, again, the spongy factor here is key. And the thickness, there are some that are out there that are too thin and they just don't give you enough. Now, if you need a lot of lift, you can also like stack these little puppies up, you know, just get them up in a nice big wedge. But again, that spongy factor helps it to sort of like rest nicely as opposed to something that's like more rigid. Some folks have recommended things like little door stoppers or other things like drawer stoppers, but I always come back to these. These are a fave. These are also nice because you can tear them up. Like maybe you just need like a little bit of lift. This actually happens quite often as we tear them up, just a little bit of lift like under a bun or under a piece of chicken or something. You just want the light to catch it just a little bit better. Stick a sponge under there. And then number 1, the thing we use on every single shoot, the thing that I think at this point we have a budget line item in the studio expenses for is lint-free paper towels. Love a lint-free paper towel, of course, for cleanup and things like that, but also super helpful for keeping our greens and our herbs fresh so that you just wet it down, get it nice and damp, put your herbs in there, roll them back up, keep them in the fridge, keeps them nice and fresh longer. But the lint-free being important, so as we're cleaning up a scene, we're not leaving a little trail of lint behind us as we're cleaning up. Now, those are the top 14 things that we most frequently use here in my studio, but I'd love to know, is there something on your list, a food styling tool that you love, that you frequently use that I did not share? Love to hear that down in the comments below. Thanks as always for coming to hang out with me. I hope you have a fantastic day. You stay out of trouble. I'll see you soon. All right, bye.